The village of Eldenbrook had always been a quiet place. Stone cottages lined the winding paths, moss grew thick on the thatched roofs, and everyone knew each other's business. But none of them truly knew Nalia. She was the girl who walked softly, who kept her eyes down, who embroidered her silence into every stitch of fabric she mended. Her world was small, a stretch of path between her mother's hearth and the weaver's stall, a single worn book kept beneath a floorboard, and the cautious rhythm of her breath when her stepfather entered the room. The night it happened began like any other. The clinking of bottles, the heavy shuffle of boots, the murmured prayers Nalia whispered to herself as she stirred the soup. Her mother was folding linens in the corner, eyes flicking nervously toward the doorway. Rain drummed steadily on the roof. He stumbled in, soaked and sour, and slammed the door behind him. The air tightened. Nalia froze, her fingers clenched around the wooden spoon. He muttered curses about the harvest, about taxes, about useless mouths. Then his eyes landed on her, on the soup, too thin, too bland, and his scowl deepened. "You call this food?" he spat. Nalia hesitated. She knew better. But something in her had grown tired of the silence, the fear, the nights she watched her mother shrink smaller and smaller. So she said it, quietly but clearly. "You've had 3 cups of ale today. Maybe it's your tongue that's gone dull." The room turned still. Her mother dropped a cloth. Her stepfather's face shifted from shock to rage in a blink. And then, without warning, his hand shot out. A searing weight, a pot of oil half prepared for frying, arced through the air. She didn't scream. Not right away. The pain came with a roar, a red-hot tide that devoured the left side of her face. She dropped to the floor, clutching her cheek, her temple, her eye. The smell of burning flesh, sickly sharp, filled the room. Her stepfather stood above her, panting. Her mother sank against the wall, her hands trembling but unmoving. Not a word. Not a cry. Just silence. The days that followed blurred into each other. Nalia lay in the loft, a cool cloth pressed to her face, unable to open her left eye. The pain was unbearable, but worse was the way her mother moved around her, carefully, guiltily, but distantly, like Nalia's presence was a wound she didn't know how to dress. Word spread. It always did. The healer came, but not kindly. He didn't speak to Nalia, only to her stepfather, who stood tall and sober, nodding with feigned remorse. "An accident," he said. "The pot slipped." The healer accepted the lie with a shrug. When Nalia tried to return to the village square weeks later, scarf wrapped tightly around her head, the whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the girl. She provoked him, they say. She was always strange. Never smiled much. Shame about the face. She was almost pretty. She said nothing. Just walked to the well, filled her bucket and walked back." One of the village boys who used to toss her flowers now looked away as if she were something twisted, something wrong. Her mother pretended not to hear the gossip. She resumed chores with feverish energy, scrubbing pots and floors as if they might erase what had happened. But she didn't look at Nalia anymore. Not fully. Only sideways with a flicker of guilt, then down. Nalia took to walking the hills at dusk, when the village lights faded and the world felt quieter. She found a small hollow beneath the elder tree and began to bring her embroidery there. Her needlework hadn't changed, still precise, still beautiful, but she no longer sold it. It was her only refuge, her only voice. She stitched wildflowers she remembered from spring, birds that never came this far north, stars that didn't match the real sky. Each night she returned home to silence. Her stepfather never spoke of what he'd done. He never apologized. But the way he watched her, uneasy, uncertain, said enough. She didn't flinch when he passed. Not anymore. Something colder had taken root inside her, something that refused to yield. One morning, while rinsing laundry at the stream, she caught her reflection. The left side of her face was a web of raw, angry scars. The skin puckered near her jaw and one eyelid drooped. Her lip bore a faint crack where the oil had kissed her mouth. She did not cry. She simply looked. Accepted it. She was no longer the girl who embroidered flowers for coin or dreamed of stories in her hidden book. She was something else now. Something forged in oil and silence. The village children ran from her sometimes. One called her Witch Face. His mother scolded him, but only half-heartedly. Nalia didn't retaliate. She only watched, memorizing the way people shrunk in the presence of what they did not understand. But there were nights, late, bone-deep nights, when she would press her hand to the cool stone wall and wish. Not for her old face, not even for her old life, but for a place where she could exist without fear, where no one would look at her like she was a punishment. On the edge of one such night, when the moon hung low and full, a wind swept through the village. Nalia stood in her hollow, thread in hand, and whispered to the sky. "I didn't deserve this." The wind stirred her scarf. The stars seemed to shimmer closer. But no answer came. Only the silence she'd come to know so well. She returned home to find her mother asleep in the chair, arms crossed, face slack with exhaustion. Her stepfather snored on the cot. Nalia stepped around them quietly, moving like a ghost. In the loft, she lit a stub of candle and pulled out her latest cloth. It was nearly finished now, a portrait of a woman standing alone on a hill, one half of her face shadowed, the other turned toward the stars. There was no beauty in it by village standards. But there was strength. There was survival. She stitched one final line beneath the figure. Not a name, not a date, but a single word: still. Then she folded it away and closed her eyes, not to dream, but to rest. For tomorrow, like every day, she would rise. And she would endure. Because that was what Nalia did. Scarred or whole. Feared or forgotten. She endured. Days stretched into weeks, and life in Eldenbrook resumed its quiet rhythm. But for Nalia nothing felt the same. The world she had known, small, gray but once predictable, had become a place of barbs and whispers. Every time she stepped outside she felt it, the weight of eyes, the sharpness of comments just barely concealed behind palms and pursed lips. Her veil, once simply a scarf worn against the wind, had become a necessity. Without it, children stared, some cried. One even screamed. She never forgot that boy, no older than 6, who pointed and cried, "Monster!" His mother had scolded him half-heartedly, then turned to Nalia with a look not of apology, but of pity laced with disgust. Nalia had nodded without a word and continued walking. That night, she'd sat alone in the hollow beneath the elder tree, her veil beside her, letting the cool air kiss her ruined cheek. She didn't cry. She never cried anymore. But she did run her fingers along the puckered lines of skin and whisper to herself, "Not a monster. Not yours to name." The merchants in the village square used to know her as the girl who could mend lace so finely it looked like dew-strung cobwebs. They had once smiled when she approached, sometimes offering her threads or scraps to practice with. Now they eyed her warily. Prices doubled when she asked. One even shooed her away saying, "I've no work for your kind," without explaining what kind he meant. You didn't have to. Nalia learned to shop early in the morning or late in the day, when the square was emptier. She kept her veil low and her voice even lower. She carried her coins tightly in her palm and spoke only when necessary. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. She no longer belonged. She was an echo of something uncomfortable, something shameful. Better tucked away. Her stepfather took pride in that. "She don't talk back now, do she?" he boasted to his drinking friends in the tavern. Taught her a lesson. Tamed her like a wild pup. The men would grunt or laugh or shake their heads depending on how much ale they'd had. Some murmured things about keeping girls in line, and Nalia, though hidden outside in the dark near the door, heard every word. She memorized them. Not because she believed them, but because she wanted to remember the poison they carried so she could learn how to draw it out, strand by strand like a thorn from skin. Her mother, meanwhile, had become quieter than ever. They rarely spoke beyond the necessities of the day. Meals were made, floors were swept, laundry was hung. Her mother never asked how Nalia felt. Never asked what she needed. But every now and then, when she thought Nalia wasn't looking, she stared at her with an aching guilt that passed like a ghost across her face. It never lasted. And Nalia never called it out. She knew better than to disturb a silence her mother needed to survive. At night, when her stepfather's snores filled the cottage and her mother slept curled like a question mark, Nalia crept to her hiding place beneath the floorboard. Her book was still there, the one with the fraying cover and golden letters, the one filled with tales of kingdoms and heroes and lost daughters who always found their way home. She read by candlelight, her good eye flickering over every word. But it wasn't the princes or magic spells that captured her anymore. It was the quiet parts. The girl who learned to listen to the wind, the queen who ruled not with fire but with silence. Nalia understood them in a way she never had before. She wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. She was learning how to become something else. Something strong enough to walk alone. She returned to her embroidery, slowly at first. Her fingers were clumsier than before, scar tissue tugged against old habits, but the muscle remembered. She didn't stitch flowers now. Instead she stitched thorns, fire, feathers, broken chains. Her needle traced anger and strength and sorrow into the fabric over and over. She didn't sell her pieces. She buried them beneath the floorboards with her book. They weren't for anyone else's eyes. Not yet. Every so often she went to the edge of the village, to the broken fence that led into the wild hills. She thought about leaving. Thought about walking past the line of trees and never returning. But something rooted her still. Not fear. Not duty. It was something else, a slow-burning flame buried deep. It wasn't time yet. The children continued to taunt her. A group of girls her age passed her one morning, giggling behind cupped hands. I heard she cursed the miller's baby. No, I heard she talks to shadows. Maybe she was always like that. Just hid it better. They didn't say her name. They didn't have to. Nalia walked by without reacting. But later that evening she pulled a piece of black fabric from her stash and began a new piece. She stitched a girl standing in a storm, surrounded by crows, her face half-lit and fearless. Beneath her feet the words, "Let them whisper." Her stepfather began to look at her differently too. Less triumphant now. More wary. She never flinched when he passed, never avoided his gaze. She spoke little but moved with a calm certainty that unsettled him. Once, during supper, he knocked over a mug and cursed. Nalia didn't move to clean it. She simply looked at him and waited. "What?" he barked. "You go deaf now, girl?" "No," she said evenly. "I go quiet." He stared at her. Then left the mug on the floor and muttered something about ungrateful brats before stomping outside. She waited until the door shut. Then cleaned the mug herself. On the day of the harvest fair, the villagers held a contest for best bread, best ribbon work, best pig. Nalia didn't attend. But she sent a piece, an embroidered banner with a phoenix rising from flame, through the baker's daughter who'd once known her before the scar. The banner didn't win. It wasn't even displayed. But the baker's daughter returned with a whisper. "They said it was too strange," she told Nalia outside her cottage. "But I thought it was beautiful." Nalia only nodded. She didn't need their ribbons. Winter crept in slowly, wrapping the village in frost. Smoke curled from chimneys and candles flickered in every window. Nalia wrapped herself in layers and walked the hills more often, finding warmth in movement, in breath, in the rhythm of footsteps over cold earth. She had taken to talking aloud sometimes, not to anyone, not even to the wind, but to herself. "Today I walked without fear. Today I saw the boy who screamed at me. He looked away. Today I felt the fire inside me again." And one day she added, "I am not done." Because something was changing in her. Not all at once. Not loudly. But surely. Like embers buried beneath ash, waiting. Not to burn the world down, but to light her own way forward. It was the kind of morning that clung to the edges of winter, when the frost still kissed the grass and the clouds hung low like wool across the sky. Nalia had ventured out early, the veil over her face drawn snug, her steps quiet on the dirt path as she made her way to the apothecary. Old Minna let her collect herbs sometimes in exchange for needlework. The task calmed her. The stillness of the garden, the structure of identifying plants, all soothed something frayed within her. She was kneeling near the patch of fever root when she heard the tapping. Not footsteps exactly, but a steady beat like wood against stone, then a pause, then again. She looked up, wary. A man was approaching, his head bowed slightly, one hand outstretched, the other gripping a polished cane with a silver tip. He moved carefully, yet with the kind of confidence that came from practice, not sight. Nalia's breath caught. The man was blind. She watched him make his way toward the herb garden, stopping just short of the low gate. His face was lined with travel, not age, and his hair was dark with threads of silver. His clothes were simple, dusty from the road, but finely stitched at the collar. He turned his head slightly, sensing her presence. "Is this Minna's garden?" he asked, his voice low and even. Nalia hesitated. People rarely spoke to her first. And if they did, it was with a tone that carried more edge than grace. But this voice had none of that. It was curious, not commanding. "Yes," she said, her own voice quieter still. "You're standing just outside the gate." He nodded. "Good. I thought I smelled chamomile, but it's hard to tell in this cold." He tilted his head toward her. "Would you mind helping me find some?" Nalia looked around, half expecting someone to intervene, to warn him off, to whisper about the veiled girl in the garden. But the square was still empty. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "What do you need it for?" she asked, not out of suspicion but habit. Most people only came for medicine when something was wrong. "A cough," he said, smiling faintly. "Not mine. A friend's. I was told Minna might be able to help, but she's not in her shop." "She's sick," Nalia replied. "She asked me to gather for her this week." "Ah," he said. "Then I'm twice fortunate. May I join you?" She hesitated again, uncertain. But something in his stance, open, unthreatening, eased her tension. She stepped closer and gently touched his arm, guiding him through the gate. "Careful," she said. "The stones are uneven." He chuckled softly. "I trust your eyes more than my memory." They walked slowly through the rows, Nalia pointing out the fever root, the sage, the dried remnants of summer's bloom. He asked about each one, where it grew, how it was used, and she answered with what she knew. He listened with a kind of attention that surprised her. No one had listened to her like that in years. After a while, he crouched carefully beside her as she plucked dried chamomile heads from the brittle stalks. His hands, though calloused, moved with a kind of grace, testing texture, weight, scent. He worked in silence for a long moment, then said, "You speak with care, like someone who measures words before releasing them." Nalia paused, her fingers tightening around the stem. "I don't speak much." "Not because you can't," he said gently. She said nothing. He nodded as though she had confirmed something. "You wear a veil. May I ask why?" She stiffened. The question was direct, too direct. She expected mockery or pity, or the self-righteous sting of unsolicited prayer. But none came. He waited, cane balanced across his lap, hands still. After a long silence she replied, "Because people can't help how they react. And I got tired of watching them try not to stare." He tilted his face slightly toward her voice. "Then I won't ask to see. It's not what I came here for." She looked at him, surprised. "Aren't you curious?" "Of course," he said. "But curiosity isn't a license. You owe no one your face." Something in her chest fluttered, something like relief and disbelief at once. She hadn't realized how much she'd come to expect cruelty from strangers. His words felt like warm water on frozen ground. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Elias," he said. "Elias Thorne." She repeated it once in her head. "Elias." It felt old-fashioned, like something from one of her books. "And yours?" "Nalia." He smiled again. "Thank you, Nalia, for your guidance." They worked in silence a little longer. When the sun finally began to warm the garden wall, he stood slowly, wincing as his joints protested. "Too long in one place," he muttered. "I'll have to sit by the fire for an hour." Nalia hesitated, then reached for the pouch of herbs they'd gathered. She pressed it into his hand. "You should go to the baker's daughter. She'll steep it properly." "I will," he said. "But may I come again?" She blinked. "Why?" "I like your voice," he said simply. "And your company." No one had said that to her in years, if ever. Her voice, her presence, had become things to tolerate, not seek out. "You can," she said at last, and to her own surprise she meant it. He returned the next day, and the next. Sometimes he asked for help identifying herbs. Sometimes he brought dried flowers to trade for thread. They sat on the edge of the garden wall or beneath the awning when it rained, talking in soft tones that never invited attention. He asked her things others never dared, what books she liked, whether she ever stitched stories into her cloth, what she dreamed about as a child. Not once did he mention her veil. "I used to want to be a cartographer," she told him one morning, turning a sprig of lavender between her fingers. "A map maker?" "Yes. I liked the idea of drawing places I'd never seen. Places that might not even exist. And now," she smiled faintly beneath the veil, "now I make maps no one sees. With thread." He was quiet for a long time. Then said, "I'd like to see one someday." She didn't answer. One afternoon, as clouds boiled across the sky and thunder whispered low in the distance, Elias paused mid-conversation. "You carry pain like a stone in your pocket," he said softly. "But also something else. A light maybe. Or the memory of one." She looked at him, startled. "How can you tell?" He tapped his cane gently against the stone. "I've walked with both." She didn't respond. Not then. But later that night she took one of her hidden embroideries from beneath the floorboard, one that showed a blindfolded figure surrounded by stars, and left it folded beneath the bench where they often sat. The next morning it was gone. They never spoke of it. But from that day on, Elias never arrived empty-handed. He brought feathers, smooth stones, a piece of polished glass. And once, a small jar of honey with a hand-carved spoon. "For the bitter days," he said simply. One evening, as the light turned gold and the village square rang with the sound of the bell tower, Elias said, "People look at me and think I see nothing. But blindness doesn't mean absence. Sometimes, it means seeing more than they want you to." She looked down at her hands, at the scarred skin where beauty used to live. Then at Elias, who sat beside her with a kind of stillness that felt like safety. "Do you see me?" she asked. He turned his face toward her voice. I do. And for the first time in a very long time, Nalia believed it. The first time Nalia brewed tea for Elias, it was more out of impulse than planning. She had just returned from the apothecary's garden with a bundle of dried lemon balm and thyme. The weather had turned chill again, the kind of cold that crept into bones and refused to leave, no matter how thick the walls or how many shawls one wore. She thought of Elias's stiff joints, the way he pressed his hand into his back after sitting too long, and without thinking, she prepared a kettle. The cottage was dark, save for the fire's low light and the thin oil lamp she kept by the windowsill. She laid out 2 cups. Hers was chipped. The other was a blue porcelain cup she hadn't used in years, one that once belonged to her mother. When Elias arrived, guided by memory and cane, he smiled the moment he stepped in. It smells like a garden trying to tell a story, he said, pausing by the door to listen to the soft clinking of metal against ceramic. It's lemon balm, she said, pouring carefully. And thyme. It's supposed to ease the lungs. Or heal the heart, he murmured, stepping forward. From that night on, tea became their ritual. They sat each evening as the sun sank behind the hills. Nalia would brew herbs, sometimes ones she found herself, sometimes those gifted by Minna when she was in better health. Elias would settle in the chair by the hearth, his cane resting against his leg, his fingers wrapped around the warm cup like it was an anchor in the storm. It was during these hours that he began to speak in longer stories, tales of cities built of red stone and silver light, of temples where bells sang at dawn, of marketplaces that never closed, where music and spices tangled in the air. He spoke of coastal towns where fishermen told legends to the sea, and it whispered back in waves and salt. Nalia listened like a woman starving. Each story painted colors over the gray walls of her life. She'd never been beyond the next village, never seen anything larger than a festival gathering or a wedding fire. Her world had always been small, by force, by fear, by the shadow her stepfather cast over her days. But Elias's voice cracked the ceiling of her mind open. Have you truly been to all those places? She asked one night, her cup balanced on her knees. Some of them, he said. Others were described to me. And some I stitched together from fragments. Memory, imagination, there's a thread between them. And you can tell the difference? I don't always want to, he replied with a wry smile. She smiled too, though he couldn't see it. She wondered what it was like to live a life where people told you stories, not rumors. Where your presence was welcome, not tolerated. One night, after a particularly long silence between them, Elias tilted his head. You hold yourself so tightly, he said. Even your silence is careful. She sipped her tea, not answering. He continued, but your voice, when you let it out, it's strong. Not in volume. And wait. Like it carries more than it should. Maybe it does, she said softly. He set down his cup. I've traveled many roads. Heard many voices. Some lie sweetly. Some tremble with fear. But yours doesn't bend. Even when you whisper. She swallowed. You're imagining that. No, he said. Blindness has taught me how to hear what eyes miss. That struck something in her. Most people believed blindness was a lack. Elias carried his like a presence. It was never hidden, never pitted. It was simply part of him, like his cane or his calm. And it allowed him to notice the things others dismissed. Like her voice. Like the shift in air when she entered a room. Like the breath she always held just beneath the veil. Do you think, she asked carefully, that people could learn to listen like you? Some, he said. If they wanted to. She looked at the fire. Most don't. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Then you speak anyway. For yourself. For the girl inside who was told to be quiet. The room fell into a hush again. Outside, the wind brushed against the shutters like a memory trying to return. Nalia reached for her embroidery basket, half out of habit. Her fingers found a patch of dark green thread. She began to stitch without thinking. Just a swirl, a curve, the shape of a sea she had never seen. Elias listened to the rhythm of her needle. Do you ever stitch thorns? He asked suddenly. She looked up. What do you mean? Thorns. Sharp things. Wounds. I try not to. Why? Because the world already has enough. He nodded slowly. Fair. But thorns have their own kind of beauty. They protect the rose. They keep careless hands away. She considered that. Then very quietly she said, I've stitched my scars before. In thread. Not the real ones. Because the thread won't flinch? She nodded, forgetting he couldn't see. Yes, she said aloud. He leaned back, smiling. Then those are your thorns. And your truths. Nalia didn't know how to reply. So she brewed another pot. Over the weeks that followed, the tea deepened. She began adding elderflower, then valerian, then a hint of lavender. Each blend was new, like a note in a song. Elias would try them, guessing the ingredients, teasing her when he got one wrong. It became their language. She began to leave the veil off in the evenings. Not because he asked, he never did, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like not to hide, even if only in flickering light. One evening, after a day of cold wind and bitter errands, she came home to find Elias already at the door, leaning lightly on his cane. "You're early," she said, surprised. "I needed the company," he admitted. "And the warmth." She let him in, and they sat without words for a long while. The fire crackled. The tea steamed. She stitched a crescent moon with a thread the color of midnight. Then, softly, Elias said, "My father used to say a cup of tea can hold an entire world." She looked up. "And if that's true," he continued, "then yours holds a world that forgives even when it remembers." She blinked. "Why do you say that?" "Because each time I drink it, I feel like something inside me is being seen. Without needing to be explained." Her hands trembled a little. "Elias," she whispered, "why do you come here?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because this is the only place where my blindness is not treated like a limitation. And your voice is not treated like a wound." She turned her face away. Not from shame, but to keep the tears from falling where he might hear them. He reached gently toward the table, his fingers finding the edge of the cup, then settling near her hand. "I know pain when I hear it," he said. "I know strength too. You carry both. And you carry them well." Her voice was barely audible. "No one has ever said that to me." He smiled. "Then I'm honored to be the first." That night, as he walked home under the stars, guided by the sound of his cane and the memory of her voice, Nalia remained by the fire. She did not cry. She stitched a single rose, with one beautiful thorn. The evening began like any other, tea steeping in the corner, herbs dancing in the steam, and the gentle hush of Elias's cane tapping against the threshold as he arrived. Nalia opened the door and stepped aside wordlessly. She didn't need to greet him anymore, he always knew she was there. The wind had changed again. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the village, signaling that the season was preparing to turn. Nights like this reminded Nalia of pain, of the cold, of the long burn that never quite left her skin no matter how many winters passed. She wore a heavier scarf now, layered tightly with her usual veil. Elias walked in and paused. "You rearranged the chairs." She smiled faintly. "Only a little. Thought you might want to sit closer to the fire." He followed her voice, found the seat with ease, and lowered himself carefully. She poured the tea, mint and nettle, a calming mix. She handed him the cup and watched as his fingers curled around it like it was an old friend. They sipped in silence. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves in restless spirals. The village would be shuttering for the night soon. Nalia had not ventured far that day. An old merchant refused to sell her bread when he recognized her voice, and a group of children had laughed too loudly as she passed. The safety of her home had never felt more precious. "I heard them today," Elias said as if reading her thoughts. "The boys at the edge of the square." She tensed. "I walked past quickly. They didn't see you. They didn't need to. They've learned my footsteps, my laugh, my silence." Elias was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Why do you wear it every day?" She stiffened. "The veil," he clarified. "You don't have to answer." Her breath caught. "I've wondered," he continued gently. "Not because I need to know what you look like, but because I want to understand what it costs you to hide." Nalia set her cup down carefully. Her fingers trembled. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing light against the walls, flickering like old memories. "I wear it because people told me I should," she said. "After the oil. After my stepfather said it was a kindness, keeping others from seeing it." "And you believed them?" "No," she said. "But I believed in survival. And hiding was the easiest way to walk through the village without hearing every gasp, every lie, every whisper." Elias nodded. "That's not the same as choosing." She looked at him. He was not looking at her, he never did. His eyes, clouded and distant, never aimed anywhere specific. And yet she always felt seen. Understood in a way that neither pity nor curiosity had ever given her. "Do you want to see?" she asked softly. He turned his head slightly. "I won't ask for something that causes you pain." She shook her head. "It doesn't hurt anymore." "Then do it only if you're ready." Nalia stood. She stepped around the firelight and stood across from him. Slowly she reached for the veil. It had become a second skin. layers of fabric pinned and folded in place over the years. She untied it from behind her head, her hands working with surprising steadiness. The scarf slid from her shoulders and fell to the floor in a whisper. Her skin, once smooth and golden, bore the memory of flame. The right side of her face was marked with twisting patches, some red, others pale and shiny. Her jaw had healed unevenly. One eyebrow never fully grew back. She was no longer the girl who once played by the river or braided flowers into her hair. She stood like that, bare, silent, trembling, unsure what she expected. Pity maybe. Revulsion. A shift in his breathing. Something. But Elias didn't flinch. His face did not change. His head remained tilted slightly, listening, not looking. "You're quiet," she whispered. He set his cup down. "I was listening," he said. "To what?" "Your bravery." She blinked hard. "You sound like sunlight," he said. Tears, unbidden and burning, rushed to her eyes. She turned away sharply, but it was too late. Her shoulders shook. A sob escaped. She clutched the edge of the table as the years crashed down over her all at once. She had not cried in years. Not after the burns, not when they denied her a place at school, not when she overheard the baker saying she should have been left to die. She had become stone to survive. But Elias's words shattered that stone gently, like water smoothing rough edges over time. He did not move toward her. He did not say anything else. He waited. When she could speak again, her voice was raw. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's true. Your voice, it carries something I can't describe. And now that I've heard it while you're not hiding, it's even stronger. Warmer. Real." She sank to the floor beside the hearth, unable to hold herself upright. "I'm not beautiful," she whispered. "Who told you beauty was the goal?" he asked. "Who said your worth had anything to do with symmetry?" She couldn't answer. He leaned forward. "If the world were blind, Nalia, who would you be then?" She looked up. "I don't know." "Then maybe," he said, "this is the start of finding out." Her breath hitched again. The fire cast gold along the ridges of her scars, painting them not as wounds, but as topography, landscapes she had walked through and survived. "I thought no one would ever look at me again without seeing the pain," she said. "I don't look," Elias replied gently. "I listen. And your voice, when it's free, it's the most beautiful sound I know." She reached for the scarf out of habit but stopped herself. Let it stay there, she thought. Let it rest for now. They talked until the fire dimmed, until the tea cooled, until the silence between them became a shelter rather than a wound. Nalia felt the weight in her chest shift, a pressure she hadn't known she carried for so long. Her scars remained unchanged, but something inside her cracked open. Light seeped in. That night she did not replace the veil when she walked Elias to the door. The stars above them shimmered like watchful eyes, and the wind no longer felt cruel against her skin. "You're brave," Elias said quietly as they reached the edge of the garden. "I'm trying to be." "You already are." She smiled. He tapped the cane twice on the ground before turning away, his steps sure as always. She watched until the darkness swallowed him. And then, still unveiled, heart pounding like thunder, Nalia walked back inside and left the scarf folded by the fire. The winter sun bled through the clouds like a reluctant truth. It was the kind of pale, colorless morning where shadows clung to corners and the cold felt sharp enough to cut. Nalia knew the storm was coming long before the knock came to the door. She had seen her stepfather the evening before, lurking near the edges of the trees where Elias and she often sat, half hidden beneath branches, sipping tea and sharing stories. His face, like old rusted iron, had twisted with something more than curiosity. Something dangerous. Something feral. She had gone home early that evening, the veil in her pocket, not over her face. She wanted to pretend for just a little while longer that he hadn't seen. But he had. The knock didn't wait for permission. The door slammed open as if by wind, though there was no wind that morning. He stood in the frame, tall, stooped slightly now with years of drink and bitterness, but no less imposing. His eyes were already glassy. "You ungrateful little parasite," he hissed. "So this is what you've been doing? Sneaking off like some alley filth, letting strange men touch you under the trees?" Nalia didn't flinch. "He hasn't touched me. Don't lie to me." He struck the table beside her with his open hand, rattling the cups still drying from last night's tea. "You walk like a whore now. Holding your chin up. Laughing." He spat. "I thought I burned that out of you." Nalia's spine went rigid. "You didn't burn anything out of me. You tried, but I survived you." Wrong words. She knew it before she finished saying them. His face darkened like meat left to rot. "You think you're clever now, is that it?" he seethed. "Think some blind fool will take you in? Think you're worth anything with that ruined skin and that bastard tongue of yours?" She stepped back. He followed. When he lunged for her, she sidestepped, barely, and his hand slammed into the wall instead of her cheek. The sound of bone-on wood cracked the stillness of the room. She ran then, pushing past him, slamming the door behind her. The path to the tree grove was frozen, roots slick with frost. Her breath burst from her like smoke. Behind her, she heard him curse and stumble and follow. She didn't look back. Elias was already waiting in the grove. He heard her steps and stood immediately. His cane was held upright in both hands, the tip lightly brushing the soil like it always did, anchoring him to the world. "Elias," she cried. He turned toward her voice. His face, usually calm and thoughtful, stiffened at the tone. "What is it?" She didn't have time to answer. The crashing came a moment later, branches snapping, boots slamming earth. Her stepfather stormed into the clearing like a beast let loose. His coat flared behind him and a bottle swung loosely in his grip. "So this is him," he sneered, voice low and thick with contempt. "The holy man." Elias's head tilted slightly. "Nalia, is this someone I should fear?" "No," she said breathlessly. "But he thinks we should." Her stepfather snarled. "Answering for her now, are you?" Elias took a single step forward. "She's done nothing wrong," he said evenly. "You don't know what she is. You don't see her." His voice cracked with something deeper, rage, fear, perhaps even shame, though it had long soured into cruelty. "You blind fool. You don't know what she looks like. That girl is broken. Scarred. Tainted." "I don't need to see her," Elias said softly, "to know she is more whole than you'll ever be." The bottle flew through the air. Elias heard it and ducked just in time. It missed his shoulder and shattered against the tree behind him, sending shards into the soil. Nalia screamed. Her stepfather rushed toward Elias, arm raised. And then, too fast for reason, Elias moved. He stepped aside, twisting with a practiced ease, and the tip of his cane caught the attacker's ankle. Her stepfather stumbled forward with a grunt, off balance, and Elias brought the cane back around, striking sharply against his wrist. The second swing connected with the man's side. He howled, shocked more than hurt. Elias remained still. "You think being blind makes me weak," he said quietly. "But I've fought men like you before. Loud men. Cruel men. Men who mistake fear for power. You bastard." Nalia's stepfather lunged again. Elias pivoted. His cane jabbed forward, catching the man in the solar plexus. A sharp, gasping cough tore from the man's throat as he doubled over. Behind them, voices echoed through the trees. Villagers. Drawn by the noise. Some came from the paths, others from the market trail. They moved cautiously, forming a rough circle at the grove's edge. No one stepped in, yet. Nalia stood at the center, veilless, breath coming in heavy gulps. Elias turned toward the crowd. "He came here to hurt her," he said calmly. "Again." Gasp. Some looked at her. Some looked away. Nalia's stepfather coughed, still hunched. "She lied. She bewitched him. She's filthy. Marked." Nalia raised her voice. "He burned me," she said. "He threw oil on my face when I was 12. The words sliced through the air like knives. He said it was to teach me humility. Said my beauty made me arrogant. Said no man would want a girl who couldn't obey." The crowd murmured. Several shifted uncomfortably. One woman looked down at her shoes. A younger man whispered something to his wife. Nalia stared at all of them. "You knew. Some of you knew. You saw the bruises. Heard the screams. You did nothing." "I told the priest," someone murmured. "You left food once," another said weakly. Nalia turned back to her stepfather, who had sunk to his knees in the frost. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "I won't be silent. You can scream. You can threaten. You can throw all the bottles you want. But you don't own me." He looked up at her then, something broken in his face. Not regret. Not remorse. Just the dawning horror of a coward who realizes his weapon no longer works. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Then a man. Then another. Her stepfather tried to rise, but the villagers closed in around him. Not to beat him. Not to hurt him. But to see him. To witness. There was no more hiding now. Later, when the constable came and took him away, no one cheered. It was not a victory, it was a reckoning. That night, Elias and Nalia sat by the hearth again. Her scarf was folded neatly in a drawer, untouched. Her face was uncovered, but her soul even more so. "I'm sorry it happened here," Elias said. "I'm not," she replied. He raised a brow. "Because it's over now. And because you stood beside me when it mattered." He smiled faintly. "I'll always stand beside the sunlight." And for the first time in her memory, Nalia laughed, freely, fully, and without fear. The villagers had always preferred to avert their eyes. Pain made them uncomfortable. Suffering, especially when silent, was easier to ignore. Nalia had become a ghost in her own home, and the streets of the village had long adjusted to her presence as if she were part of the scenery, a shadow that passed without notice. But that evening, when the shouting from her stepfather's house spilled into the dusty square and Elias's cane struck the ground with righteous anger, something shifted. The sun had just dipped behind the western hills, casting long streaks of orange and violet across the sky. Elias stood in the middle of the square, his coat torn from the scuffle, his white eyes steady as if he could see straight through the people gathering in a half-circle. Nalia stood behind him, veil still clutched in her hand, her face exposed for the first time in public since the day her stepfather changed her life with a pot of hot oil. "You watched," Elias said. His voice was not loud, but it was carried by the silence that had settled over the crowd. "You heard. You knew. And still, you did nothing." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncertain, uneasy. Nalia's stepfather lay on the ground nearby, moaning faintly from where Elias had knocked the wind out of him. No one rushed to help him. "You let a girl burn," Elias continued, voice tight with fury. "You let her walk this village alone, covered and whispered about. You let him speak of her like an animal. And you all said nothing." "I didn't know," someone cried from the back, a man, young, nervous, the butcher's apprentice. "You knew enough," Elias replied, turning his face toward the voice. "You knew to look away." From the crowd, a frail voice rose. "I tried to speak once." All eyes turned. It was the old woman who lived by the edge of the woods. She stepped forward, her gnarled hands shaking. "I came to your door that first night, Nalia. Do you remember?" she asked. Nalia blinked. She hadn't remembered, only a vague sound at the door long ago, the night after the burning. "I brought a poultice," the woman said. "Your stepfather screamed at me. Said if I came back I'd regret it. And I didn't come back." The woman bowed her head in shame. Another voice followed, steadier, the baker. "She used to come by bread, this one. Always so polite, always with coins wrapped in cloth like she was ashamed to touch us. I saw her hands. I saw how she flinched. I should have known. I should have asked." "You did know," Elias said sharply. "You all knew something was wrong. But you didn't want to see it." Nalia stood trembling, her mouth dry, her hands clenched at her sides. She had never heard anyone speak this way, never heard someone defend her, not like this, not publicly, not with the kind of truth that shook people awake. Elias turned to her then, voice softer. "Will you speak, Nalia?" Her heart pounded. Her throat felt closed. But then she saw the faces around her, not all cruel, just ashamed. Human. Her voice began small, shaking. "He poured oil on me," she said, forcing the words past her lips. "My stepfather. Because I dropped his plate." A gasp, collective, sharp. "I was 10, she continued. "And he said I was wild. That I needed to be taught not to disobey. That my face was my pride and I had to learn not to depend on it." She paused, blinking fast. "And after that I wore a veil. He said it was to protect others from looking at me. But it was to hide what he did. I never told anyone. I thought no one would believe me. And you didn't want to know." No one moved. The silence grew deeper. "He said I was lucky he kept me," she whispered. "Lucky he didn't throw me into the well. Lucky I had food. Lucky I wasn't born beautiful, because beautiful girls got stolen." Elias took a single step forward, but Nalia lifted her hand. She wasn't done. "I am not lucky," she said louder now. "I survived. I lived. I stitched every wound he left on me with silence. I worked for scraps. I walked through this village like a ghost. And you," her eyes swept the crowd, steady now, "you let him." The shame that followed was like a wave crashing on the rocks. A man stepped forward, an older merchant. "I remember once. I saw her in the market. Her sleeve was torn. I thought just a poor child. I thought, maybe it's not my business." "That's the problem," Elias said. "You all thought it wasn't your business." A girl, younger than Nalia by a few years, wept openly. "He told my mother I wasn't allowed to play with her. That she was dangerous. We believed him." Now voices rose, small confessions, hesitant apologies, truths spoken under the fading sun. Nalia looked at them all. She was tired, not just from that day but from years of holding it all in. She had never spoken so much in her life. Never felt so bare. But in that nakedness there was something strange, something new. Strength. "I don't need your pity," she said, steady now. "I need your truth. If you want to fix what you let break, start by seeing me. Not as a scar. Not as a story. As a person." The villagers nodded, some slowly, some with tears in their eyes. The mayor, silent until now, pushed forward through the crowd. This must be investigated. Officially. He must face trial." "He will," Elias said. "And she must be protected," the mayor added. "She will protect herself," Elias replied. "But yes, help her if your help is true." A boy who had once thrown rocks at Nalia when she passed by now knelt on the ground, sobbing quietly. His mother pulled him into her arms. Nalia's stepfather groaned again, still on the dirt. No one helped him. "What do we do now?" someone asked. Nalia answered before Elias could. "You start by not turning away," she said. "Next time someone is hurt, ask. Step in. Speak. And if you see someone walking through town with their head down and their voice quiet, don't ignore them. Listen." Elias stepped beside her, and together they stood in the square as the crowd dispersed. Some in shame, some in silent reverence, all of them changed. Not because they had heard a new truth, but because the truth they had avoided had finally spoken aloud. Nalia didn't smile. Not yet. But for the first time in years her shoulders eased. Her voice had been heard. And the fire in her chest, that long-burning ember of defiance, had become a flame. Under the creak of ancient wooden beams and the soft hiss of torches lining the stone hall, the village tribunal convened for the first time in nearly a decade. It had taken days of unrest, of whispered confessions and frightened murmurs, for the elders to agree, this was too big to bury, too loud to silence. The people had gathered, stirred by Elias's confrontation, by Nalia's courage, and by the unbearable weight of their own silence. Justice, whatever that might look like, was now demanded not by a few but by many. Nalia stood in the center of the room, flanked by Elias and the mayor. Her veil was gone. Her scars were bare. Her eyes met no one and everyone at once. She did not tremble. Across the room, her stepfather lounged with a defiant smirk, as if the entire event bored him. His hands were folded like a man enjoying a tavern story. He'd brushed back his hair, dressed in his best tunic, still stained, still smug. He didn't believe the village had the spine to punish him. The tribunal began. The eldest of the council, a woman named Drenna, spoke first. "We are not judges in the court of kings," she said solemnly, "but we are guardians of our people's peace. And when that peace is broken, especially within the home, we must gather and listen. Not as gods but as neighbors." Nalia didn't nod. She simply breathed and waited. Witnesses were called. The old woman who had brought the poultice. The baker. The young girl who cried remembering her mother's warning. One by one they told what they had seen, what they had chosen not to question. Some wept. Some spoke in broken tones, struggling with their guilt. Others looked directly at Nalia and begged forgiveness, though she gave no answers. When it came time for Elias to speak, he stepped forward slowly, leaning on his cane, his unseeing eyes fixed forward with quiet fury. "I did not come here to play judge," he said. "But I heard this girl's voice. I heard it shake when she spoke of pain. I heard it steady when she named truth. And I ask you, what justice exists in a village that teaches the abused to hide and the abusers to boast?" He turned slightly toward the direction of Nalia's stepfather. He feared no one. Not the law. Not your stares. Not your whispers. Because none of those things stopped him. The room held its breath. Finally the accused was called to speak. Her stepfather rose with a scoff, feigning offense. "You all act surprised," he began. "As if you didn't know who I was. As if you didn't cheer when I said I'd taken my dead wife's brat. As if you haven't all said behind closed doors what I had the guts to say aloud, that wild girls need firm hands. That orphans should be grateful." A few people flinched. "She lied," he added, turning directly toward Nalia. "She always lied. She was a vain little creature before the burn. And now she wants your sympathy. She wants my house, my land, my—" "Enough," Elder Drenna cut in, her voice sharp. But he didn't stop. "This is all a game. You're punishing me because you were caught doing nothing. Because you're all cowards." Silence. Then the gavel, an old oak rod never used until now, struck the tribunal stone table. "The tribunal finds the testimony credible," Drenna said at last. "The witnesses consistent. And the accused, by his own words, unrepentant. We have no gallows here, no jailers. But we do have exile. The hall stirred. Nolan Black, by consensus of the elders and by the voice of this village, you are banished. You will leave before sunrise. You will not return. If you do, you will be taken before a higher court. Her stepfather froze, mouth slightly ajar. He had expected a slap on the wrist. Not this. A few in the crowd sighed. Others nodded. No one spoke in his defense. Still Nalia did not smile. As he was escorted out, grumbling and threatening, she did not gloat. She did not cry. She only watched, her heart quiet. When the doors closed behind him, she turned toward the crowd, her voice clear. Justice is not celebration. The room paused again. I don't feel joy, she said. I don't feel whole. But I feel clean. As if something has been dug up, ugly, old, and now there's space for something better. A young girl at the back whispered, like soil after fire. Nalia nodded faintly. Like that. That night, as torches flickered and the firelight danced against the stone walls, the village gathered outside. They did not sing. They did not feast. But they stood together, shoulder to shoulder, quiet and still. And in the center, where judgment had once sat heavy, something else took root. Not revenge, not punishment, but a fragile beginning. A clearing. A place where healing might grow. The morning after the tribunal, the air in the village was softer, somehow, like a wound no longer raw but beginning at last to knit. Sunlight filtered through the pale mist rising from the fields, and a few brave children walked without glancing over their shoulders. For the first time in many seasons, Nalia stepped out of her cottage without the veil. She walked slowly, her hands empty, her face bare. Some villagers turned to look. A few nodded. Some even smiled. No one mocked her. No one spat. And in that simple silence, something shifted, something deeper than apology. It was respect. Elias stood by the well, his cane resting lightly against one arm, speaking with the apothecary. He had grown fond of the man's dry humor and steady voice, and Nalia knew he was preparing to leave. He had said as much the night before, gently, while they'd sat sipping chamomile by her hearth. The world is wide, he had said then, and I've still miles of it to hear. Now, as she approached, Elias turned his face toward her with uncanny precision. You're up early. I wanted to walk before the day got too warm, she said. And to say goodbye. Ah. The word people always pretend doesn't sting. Nalia smiled softly. It does sting. But I'll still say it. He chuckled. Then come sit a moment. They walked slowly to a flat stone beneath the tree near the edge of the village. There was stillness in the air, the kind that comes after storms. Not peace exactly, but promise. I've been thinking, she said once they were settled, about growing things. You already do, Elias murmured. I mean plants, she said with a small laugh. Herbs? Not just for me. For others. People are always coming to the apothecary, and he can't do it alone. Maybe I can grow the ingredients. Teach others to do it too. Good, Elias said. Healing's work best done with bare hands. I think I'd like that. It feels right. He didn't answer immediately, just nodded slowly. Then he reached into the satchel at his side and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. Before I go, I want you to have this. She took it carefully, untying the soft cloth to reveal a wooden box. Small, elegant, shaped like a teardrop with delicate vines carved along the lid. A music box. The crank on its side was made of polished brass. She looked up. Did you make this? I carved it during quiet evenings, Elias said. While listening to your voice. You didn't know I was listening like that, but I was. And every story you told went into it. Turn the handle. Nalia did. The box sang, soft, slow notes that spiraled into a haunting, beautiful tune. Not sorrowful, not joyous, something in between. Something like survival. Something like spring. It's beautiful, she whispered. There's a message inside, he said. Beneath the lid. Slide it open. She did. Inside the hidden panel, carved faintly into the wood, were 5 words. The world is wide. Follow it. She stared at the words for a long time. I don't know if I'll ever leave this village, she said quietly. Maybe not, Elias replied. But I hope someday you'll know you can. That your path isn't fenced by scars or fear. That you can choose where you walk. Even if it's just to the next hill. Or to a city. Or a song you've never heard. She closed the box and held it to her chest. Thank you. He stood then, brushing the dust from his cloak. Promise me one thing. Anything. When someone else with broken hands or a burned past comes knocking, open the door. Just like you did for me. I will, she said. They embraced, gently, carefully, and she watched as he walked away, tapping forward with his cane, his shoulders straight, his head high. Nalia returned to her home with the music box pressed close. That afternoon, she gathered her tools and began turning the hard patch of earth behind the cottage into a garden. It was slow work. Her hands blistered. Her knees ached. But the motion felt honest, grounding. With each seed pressed into the soil, echinacea, mint, valerian, chamomile, she felt her roots settle deeper into the land. Not roots of confinement but of choice. Word spread. Within a week, a young woman came asking how to treat a burn on her brother's leg. Nalia made a balm from comfrey and honey and showed her how to prepare it. 2 days later, an older man offered her a basket of eggs in exchange for willow bark tea for his wife's aching joints. She refused the payment but took the eggs with a laugh. In time, children wandered by, drawn to the scent of flowers and the quiet joy in the air. She taught them names, plantain, yarrow, thyme, and how to pick only what they needed. One girl with a stutter came every day and sat silently by the lavender bush, just watching it sway. And each night, Nalia returned to her little cottage, lit a single candle and turned the music box once, just once, letting the notes fill the quiet. It became a ritual. A reminder that her voice had power. That her pain had shape. That her life had direction now, set not by fire or fear, but by her own 2 hands. She did not forget Elias. She wrote letters never knowing if they'd reach him. Sometimes she spoke aloud as if he could still hear. And when the first blooms rose from her garden in full color, bold violets, deep blues, sun-warm yellows, she whispered to the wind, "The world is wide. But so is this place. So is my heart." And then she smiled, quietly, as she placed the first bouquet by her door, not for decoration but as an invitation. To healing. To growing. To the next lost soul who might come wandering, looking for a voice to believe in.